This is The Last of Us on TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about The Last of Us Episode 4, Please Hold to My Hand.
If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on? I mean, you gotta try, right?
You haven't seen the world, so you don't know. You keep going for family. That's about it.
I'm not family.
No. You're cargo. But I made a promise to Tess. And she was like family.
Welcome back, fellow survivors. This is The Last of Us podcast on TV Podcast Industries. This time we're talking about The Last of Us Episode 4, Please Hold to My Hand. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow survivors. I am one of your other hosts, John. Yes, I am alive. I did not fall into one of Bill's traps that he set for those cunning mushrooms. I am indeed back here after a week-long visit of my mother, who I was looking after while she was over.
You didn't even fall into Bill's trap of lovely, happy tears, which we said was the actual reason why you weren't here last week.
Well, that's true. No, I was thinking more of the tripwire one that would then blow my brains out.
Yes.
Effectively.
Yeah, not that one.
No.
Didn't even fall into a pit.
No, where I could be rescued by Bill.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But what did you think of the episode? I know a lot of our fellow survivors were wondering what your thoughts on episode 3 were.
I absolutely loved episode 3. Thought it was a real interesting departure from, I guess, the overarching story of this, post-apocalyptic. But, it really chimes with, you have that episode 1 with the outbreak. Episode 2 is that aftermath, the survival. Episode 3 being this love story, in the time of mushrooms rather than in the time of cholera or war or anything like that. And, they're almost distinct, but there's that lovely weaving through, particularly for episode 3, that it filled out from just a few notes and scraps of information from the game, even though you got to spend a significant amount of time with Bill in the game. You didn't see Frank, so that backstory was really good. And I think as well, the interesting thing, say, with the creator here, in Craig Mazin, is with Chernobyl, overarching story, but part of that, disaster, rescue episode, but effectively it almost became a thriller. And then a courtroom drama by the end of it. So really distinct episodes within the overall series that was Chernobyl. And I think there's a hint of that here as well coming through. And it's a really nice structure to do because, yes, you keep the overarching thrust of it, which is getting Ellie to this medical facility because of her condition. But you are just dipping in and out of things that happen in this world at this time following the outbreak. And it's really, really interesting, I find. I really enjoyed it. And of course, yes, I think the representation for over 40s was superb.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we've said before, we cover lots and lots of shows, but it's very rare that we get to cover a show with such good LGBTQ plus representation on the podcast and TV Podcast Industries. In fact, the only show I think I remember both of us being on where we talked about it was on Lovecraft Country.
Yes.
The only show I think we've seen a reasonably okay representation, but even that was another kind of a trope that was going on in that episode. This felt like it really connected with me. I know I talked about it quite a lot last episode, being a middle-aged gay man in a long-term relationship with John. I know that's something that I found connected really closely with me, but I'm sure our wonderful fellow survivors want to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, for me, it connected really well. I mean, it's good to see. I mean, it's not just representation in terms of age, but it's also representation in terms of, I think, the lifestyle of it or the body of Bill and Frank. They're not sort of glamorous Adonises that manage to keep their little bit of, Love Island going in the middle of a mushroom outbreak. But it's the fact that, you know, someone who's very much private, themselves, you know, have a whole rake of other aspects connected with who they are.
Yeah.
And organically coming from an incident, you know, they spend their life together and go out on their own terms, however horrific that is, because they've spent their life together and lived it through this horrific time.
Yeah.
But they've continued making those memorable, positive moments, and they happen to be middle-aged and aging gay men.
Exactly.
So it was really, really good for me, I think, to think, oh, that's how, I guess, my trajectory is on.
Hopefully.
Apart from crushing pills into my bottle of Merlot or something like that.
Yeah, let's hope not, John.
Let's hope not.
Let's hope not. Although I will say, fellow survivors, the look on John's face when I said a middle-aged gay man like us, John does not like being called middle-aged. So I won't say that again.
That's the other side of it. I would possibly put myself on the Frank category, younger at heart than my age would sound.
Right, good stuff.
So a bit of everything for everyone, I guess, in that sense. Depends what you want to take from it, as always. With storylines dealing with effectively normal life, it just happens to be with two gay middle-aged men, as Derek likes to say.
Exactly. Good stuff. Let's get on to our discussion about this week's episode. One thing really to call out, though, for the fourth week in a row, for episode 4, another 1 million viewers watching this show live than there were the previous week. It's been increasing every single week.
Excellent
after the episodes air. More and more people coming to watch it live on the airing on Sunday nights. It has moved this week, episode 5, coming out on Friday, well, into Saturday, in the US and the UK. This is to avoid the Super Bowl, although the live airing on HBO will be shown at the same time as the Super Bowl. They're not moving that. It's going to be available on HBO Max on Friday in the US, and in the UK confirmed by Now TV to be available at 2 a.m. So we'll get to all see it at the same time on Friday this week instead of on Sunday. So that's pretty cool that we get to see it a bit earlier, especially since this episode was a little bit shorter than the last couple of episodes have been.
Yeah, I can understand why they are moving it because of the Super Bowl. Interestingly, this episode, they were in Kansas City.
That's right.
And Kansas City will be playing in the Super Bowl. So who'd have thought that kind of serendipity or coincidence would be happening?
Do you know what I thought was even funnier? Is in the game, this episode takes place in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh Steelers being very, very famous for the Super Bowl and their time in the Super Bowl, but no longer contenders this year. So it was interesting they changed it over to another one of the strong contenders for greatest football teams of all time in Kansas City. There you go. Well, good stuff. Yeah. One other thing to say, the PC version of The Last of Us Part 1 has been delayed by 3 weeks to the end of March. It was originally supposed to come out at the beginning of March. The reason I'm mentioning that is because we do, of course, have our World Ends pub quiz going on at the moment. One question is being given out each episode. Put them all together, all 9 questions. Enter into the competition. Email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com with your answers, and you could be in your chance of winning that game on PlayStation 5 or on PC. So luckily, that doesn't impact us because we would have only been announcing the winner towards the end of March anyway. So should be okay and still aligned with the end of our podcast for the show, right?
Yeah, good stuff.
And look out for the next question later on in the episode.
Yes. And one final little bit of news, if you hadn't already seen it, was Pedro Pascal, who plays Joel in The Last of Us, was on Saturday Night Live. And it was a good little show, certainly where they did a little skit on the apocalyptic end of the world video game adaptation to TV, but in this case, it was the Mario game series.
Yes, Mario Kart.
Yes, Mario Kart. So really good.
It was very good. I think I laughed through almost every sketch in the show. Pedro Pascal clearly having a ball and always good on Saturday Night Live to see all the cast members laughing through it as well. That's always one of the fun joys of watching live comedy like Saturday Night Live. Yeah. Not very much Last of Us content in the episode, probably because there's only 3 episodes in, so quite difficult to get those scripts written and up. But I know they did use the clicker in the ad in the trailer for Pedro Pascal featuring on the show. So go check that out.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, if you like the music of Chris Martin, like Derek, then yes, he is there for entertainment as well.
I like that you call it Chris Martin, even though the rest of his bandmates were there for some of the show.
Coldplay.
Coldplay were there, yes.
Or Coldplay.
Yeah.
Like Derek does. Who has been to a gig of theirs, so he has form in this area.
I did go to help my brother out, who had 2 tickets and couldn't go on his own. And I did like that they slagged themselves off the whole way through the gig about how they know that people don't like them anymore, but they're still selling out concerts, so they'll still play.
Yes, number 1 Coldplay fan sat to my left here. But let us get on with our spoiler-filled review of The Last of Us Episode 4, Please Hold to My Hand. Before we do, remember you can head on over to tvpodcastindustries.com where you can subscribe to the podcast on any mushroomy or non-mushroomy podcast player of your choice. You can also head on over to the website to leave a voicemail for feedback. You can also send in feedback by email to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. Yeah. And of course, our spoiler post is over on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries.
Absolutely.
With that, Derek, what are some of the episode details?
Absolutely. First up, the episode title, Please Hold to My Hand. The reason it's so difficult to say is because it's a lyric in that Hank Williams song that Joel plays in the car with Ellie. That song also features in the game itself. So we have heard that song featured in the video game. So that's quite cool. But I was wondering why it was so difficult to say, get my lips around, please hold to my hand, because it just seems wrong. You feel like there's a missing word in there, but it's because it was in the Hank Williams song. There you go.
Excellent stuff.
Yeah. But this show is based on the PlayStation game, written by Neil Druckmann and directed by Bruce Straley from game publisher Naughty Dog. The show is written and executive produced by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. This episode, once again, written by Craig Mazin, and this time directing episode 4 of the show is Jeremy Webb. He has directed 3 episodes of The Punisher and 4 episodes of The Umbrella Academy. So, of course, we've spoken about him on the podcast here.
Excellent stuff. Welcome, Jeremy, to the apocalyptic fungal world.
Yes, well, he has done a lot of apocalypses in the Umbrella Academy. In fact, if I remember rightly, he was the one that directed the season 2 finale and the season 3 premiere of the Umbrella Academy. So good form there.
Yep, definitely.
And so, John, do you want to tell us what they gave us with your synopsis for The Last of Us Episode 4, Please Hold to My Hand?
Sure. Travelling on their way to Wyoming to find Joel's brother Tommy, the pair's distant relationship begins to thaw as they spend time on the road, as Joel begins to answer some of the many questions from Ellie and even gives her a few smiles as she quizzes him with puns from a book she's found. As they approach Kansas City, the route is blocked. When they take a shortcut through the ruins of the city, they get ambushed by bandits. Joel kills 2 of them, but a third manages to overpower and nearly strangle him to death, before Ellie saves him by shooting the man with her gun she took from Bill and Frank's house. As they look to escape their predicament, Joel allows Ellie to keep the handgun. The 3 bodies are found by more of the bandit group, led by Kathleen, a determined woman who has broken the control of Fedra in Kansas City to find the collaborators involved with the death of her brother. Kathleen orders a manhunt for these well-equipped outsiders, believing that Joel and Ellie are involved with a man named Henry, who she is hunting as a collaborator. Meanwhile, at Henry's abandoned hideout, Kathleen's second-in-command, Perry, also finds evidence of unusual infected activity in the basement of the same building, but Kathleen orders him to conceal it until they find Henry. Joel and Ellie, meanwhile, seek refuge in a high-rise to sleep for the night until they can scout a way out of Kansas City. Waking up to Ellie's call, he finds they are both being held at gunpoint by Henry and his younger brother Sam.
At least we presume that that's Henry and Sam. They're mentioned quite a lot in the episode. I think it's pretty likely. And I guess if you played the game, you'd probably put 2 and 2 together and guess that's who that is. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think it's more obvious if you played the game.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's still hinted at significantly there. Even though Sam, the younger brother, isn't mentioned that often, the fact that we see the abandoned loft space where they've been hiding out and eating from these bandits led by Kathleen, you see all the pictures that he's been drawing, and you see that same kind of paint or crayon on his face.
Exactly.
He's basically cosplaying here.
He's a proper Superman fan, it seems.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think we can safely assume that is Henry.
Yes.
And his very younger brother, Sam.
Exactly. Now, of course, since we don't have Chris here this week, we're not going to go through our normal top 3 moments from the episode. We're just going to talk through the episode, really. Going to talk through all the major moments. We kind of start out with the road trip of Joel and Ellie. It's an interesting one. There was a lot of, I suppose, criticism and jokes going around about the fact that they'd only gotten 10 miles outside Boston in the last episode, and it looked like they were in the middle of the countryside. And interestingly, I think the whole point of doing that in episode 3, that's saying that they'd only moved so far on foot, was because they had 2,000 miles to travel to Wyoming. And if they didn't get a car, this is the slow pace that they'd be traveling at, right?
Yeah.
They'd probably be 20 miles outside Boston or 30 miles outside Boston for the next episode. But now, having got the car from Bill and Frank's house, here they are on the road, traveling quite significant amount of miles here.
Yeah, definitely. I think on the road, but even just once they're in Kansas City as well, I think there's a really good exploration of the evolving relationship between these two. And for them personally with the audience, we see Ellie does have skills with a gun. I mean, she's able to take it apart effectively. It's certainly not something I would be able to do, or be comfortable with, but she seems fairly well at ease in taking out the clip, sort of popping the bullet out of the chamber, which in any movie you can see where people forget to do that and shoot themselves accidentally in the foot or whatever. Yeah. So, she's got some skills here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I thought there was a little bit of Bella Ramsey coming through in this. Obviously, Bella Ramsey from the UK. There's very limited access to guns over here, and I feel like they were playing it as if this is the first time being near a gun a little bit. There was moments that you felt Bella Ramsey's joy at being able to play with a gun a little bit on here. But it is really interesting to see that this is that Ellie is kind of used to handling a weapon. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, you get that moment, and you get to some extent a bit of confirmation of that in Kansas City. You hear Fedra school teaches them how to use a gun. Again, it's this world in which children have to grow up quicker because there is a survival element here. Also, that there has been other occasions where she has used guns, and I guess we'll get to that later on. Yeah. But, we have that. We also see Joel being hugely resourceful, siphoning off the petrol.
Oh, I loved this touch, because, there's, again, it's another thing that people will point out in survival shows. How the heck will gas last for 20 years? It's not the shelf life of petrol. The petrol will go off after a while if you have it sitting in your garage, or waiting to put into your lawnmower. It goes off after a few years. So there is an explanation for that for Joel. He says he has to go and do this every hour now. In the past, they would have had been able to drive on a full tank of gas for 10, 20 hours, and travel all across the country. But nowadays they have to go and get enough to fill up a tank, and it's practically water. So, it doesn't last very long. So I like that they're addressing these little questions that people have had, about surviving post-apocalypse,
Yeah, absolutely.
They've thought of all the details.
It is. And it even, later on, where Joel pulls off the road to camp down for the night, not just pulling off the road, but going into the forest to hide the vehicle, is that, foreshadowing the other danger in this world, not just clickers or runners or athlete's foot, but it is the danger of other people. And certainly out in the countryside, that clickers aren't as prevalent here.
Yeah.
It is people and what their intentions may or may not be towards outsiders or interlopers or people just simply passing through.
Yeah.
So, you know, it foreshadows that other danger in this world that then becomes very much apparent in Kansas City.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Because, you know, unlike zombies, the infected here in this world, their whole mission, what's going on, is to transfer the disease, transfer the fungus to other hosts. There's no hosts out here, so they wouldn't be out here. They're dragging themselves towards centers of population, effectively.
Yeah.
So it is slightly different to zombies. You can find a person who's died and come back as a zombie out in the wilderness, whereas here it's much more likely to be in centers of population.
Yeah. They're just thinner on the ground. They're not in a huge mass like in the cities, because you may have one or two farmsteads every, 20, 30 miles, rather than 1 million plus people concentrated in an urban center.
Yeah.
I thought this was really good, but I think, in terms of their relationship here, it's, you have on the one side Joel still very much, almost like, that adult figure telling Ellie that she mustn't eat so fast. She must chew her chef Boyardee ravioli to make it last longer, chew on it. You even have his awkwardness with the gay porn rag that she's found, and her riffing, really pulling at his levers. Why are these pages stuck together? Completely joking.
Even walk with that thing,
Exactly. She's nailed where she can sort of get maximum effect from her digs.
Absolutely. It's like,
which I really, really like.
Hang on a second. I want to see where what the fuss is all about here. And then you can see the embarrassment creeping into Pedro Pascal's face.
Exactly.
So,
and the one that kind of runs through all of this episode, which is when he tells her to go wandering but stay close, because she's asking awkward questions how the siphon works. Effectively comes to the conclusion that Joel doesn't know the principles of how a siphon works.
Yeah.
And the other side of it is what's introduced and goes across all of this episode is the pun book, and where Joel effectively tells her to stay close, to not go wandering whilst he's siphoning the gas.
Love it.
And she says, well, you're in for it now, as she begins to reel off a load of different puns from the No Pun Intended book, Volume 2. And again, whether you like or dislike puns,
love them.
It is, that kind of breaking of the ice. It's the moments of levity within this episode that run through. And that is a really nice way of seeing Joel, in a sense, soften to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I like, though, is just how, it's pulled back. Like, you kind of think, you see him giving, as they go to sleep in the woods, you see Joel with a smile about one of the puns. I think he even answers the one around the scarecrow.
He does,
without standing in his field.
Yes.
And you have Ellie calling him out for that. Have you read this already? And
it's these are dad jokes back in his day.
And you see that softening, but then, as they go on into the journey, and they've got the 25 hours to get to Wyoming, so as Ellie rightly points out, doesn't matter if the story about your brother Tommy is long, we've got 25 hours.
Yeah.
You see him opening up about his brother Tommy, but then when she asks, well, why'd you carry on? Why have you got no hope, effectively? He says, well, you keep going because of family. And he's quite clear, you're not family, you are cargo. The reason why I'm doing this is because of Tess, who was family, and I made that promise to her. So all of a sudden, it kind of, you feel there's maybe a little bit of budging going on, and then it comes back to that objectiveness of Joel. Whether that's entirely 100% at this stage, I'm sure it's softened, but it's like he's got to remind himself that I can't get attached to Ellie, or even protective, not you know, as her guardian or protector.
Yeah,
because she may die, it may all fail, or it will get me killed. So there's a selfishness there, seeing her as a piece of cargo rather than someone who he will do absolutely anything for, because she's almost become family, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly this episode starts out that way. I do think the road trip brings them much closer together. And as you say, that's evident in the puns. It's evident in the fact that they're laughing together about a terrible pun at the end of the episode. You know, it's evident that they're becoming closer, and they've gone through quite a lot together in this episode. Throughout all the rest of the episodes, remember, they've been surrounded by other people. There's always been either them pushing themselves towards the next stage of their mission. So last episode was actually about Joel trying to get Ellie to Bill and Frank, and then he was supposed to be leaving her there. They're both dead now, so, and he got a little bit of guidance to push him towards taking on his real role. And he takes on this idea of taking Ellie to the next Firefly station to take her to Tommy, and hopefully Tommy knows some Fireflies that he can leave her with. So that's where that story is coming from at the beginning, where he's saying, you're just cargo. It's, I'm taking you to Tommy, and Tommy will work out how to deal with this. By the end of the episode, he's become very protective of her. He's learnt something about her that he never knew before. The fact that she'd fired a gun and shot someone before as well, is something that he never would have thought. He thought that this was this precious little cargo that's being transported, and she doesn't have any history at all, but he's learning about her. So I think by the end of the episode, even though it's not said, and it's still a bit early in their relationship, he's not protecting her like a daughter yet, but I definitely think by the end of the episode, she's no longer cargo and moving towards that kind of family position that's been left behind by his loss of Tommy and Tess.
That's it. I mean, it really is evolving, but that's why I love how it's being portrayed and how it's being written. It really feels like that 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You know, that there's that evolution, there's that sort of fluctuation in their relationship because of the situations. But ultimately, the baseline feels like it's edging to a thaw from what it originally was. Definitely. Where it was something not on his radar at all. And it was an imposition that Marlene was asking them to do this for something that they were never involved in. So it's just one of those really great things about how the structure and the construction of this relationship within this story is, which I really, really like. And I thought really developed here, you know, because, as you say, because the two of them, it's time together on their own for that we are seeing for any length of time as the audience so far in this series.
Absolutely. And that's most of what's going on in the road here, is the development of that relationship between the two of them. But there are a couple of really interesting things that are also said on the road. You mentioned that he talked a little bit about Tommy. I really like the story that we hear about what happened between Joel and Tommy. I think in the first episode we talked about the fact that there's a bumper sticker saying that he was a war vet, and we thought it was Joel that was the war vet. It's actually Tommy who'd been in Desert Storm. And Joel is trying to protect him as the older brother. He's the one that's trying to take care of him. And that's why they end up going off and joining a group, like a group that we see in this episode. They are kind of villains in some ways, or to some other people. They go out and do the kind of things this group in Kansas City does. Then he tells us that they split apart when Marlene came on the scene and encouraged Tommy to go and join the Fireflies, and Joel is completely not aligned with their idea of saving the world. Doesn't believe the world can be saved. At that stage, I presume it would have been quite a few years into this post-apocalyptic world after the fungus had taken over,
I think,
in a sense, and he's not aligned with that at all, and let Tommy go off with Marlene for a while, at least.
I think Joel calls him a joiner.
Yes.
He's a hero who wants to save the world. He joined the army for Desert Storm, and then lastly, it was the Fireflies after the outbreak, and in both cases left them. So it's always the next cause to move to, whatever that may be, is the way Joel is kind of describing his younger brother here. Yeah.
And it kind of took me by surprise. You know, we know from the first episode that Joel worked in construction, as did Tommy. And then in this episode, Joel's calling Tommy a joiner. I was wondering, did he work in carpentry? Is that what he means? But no, he means joining different groups. So,
exactly. So, it's always been Joel having to go with Tommy in a sense until it came to the Fireflies, where he didn't want to have anything to do with Marlene and that group. So
Tommy's probably grown up old enough now to get himself out of that. One final thing that I really liked on the road as well, you sort of mentioned as well, where they bring in the idea of other humans being the terrifying thing on the road. But I love that Joel describes that to Ellie, then tells her to go to sleep, and then the next thing you see is he's awake all night. Yeah. He's almost scared himself, which I think a lot of us have gone camping in the woods for the first time, have probably scared ourselves, hearing noises in the woods, and you're going, oh, could that be another person that's going to be coming across our camp? Could that be a bear? Could that be something that's going to kill us, you know?
And certainly without the protection of that full 1 millimeter worth of fabric in terms of having a tent. I mean, it's amazing, like sleeping under the stars or under a tent. Yeah. It's, I like that. I like that touch of his nervousness around just not knowing, you know, unable to predict what may happen because other people's reasons, ambitions, aims, goals, are just not known. They're not clear because society is broken down, fragmented into different groupings.
Exactly.
Like we see with the grouping in Kansas City.
Yes, let's get there.
You know, which seems to be coming from a very personal point of view. Just before we go to Kansas City, the other thing about the road trip, which I absolutely adored, very much, you know, in contrast to this relationship element between Ellie and Joel, was just driving through the abandoned landscape of the USA here. Yeah. It was really, really good. Hugely visual. Like you see the bison by the side of the road, almost indicating, you know, nature recovering from just the pure suppression by human beings. But then you see all the infrastructure that is damaged, all those aerial shots, those wide angles showing the just slow deterioration and decay of this infrastructure, whether it's little valley towns on the way, the railway bridge over that huge expanse that's collapsed, and you can see this going to collapse
even the train
again.
itself collapsing into that
it
fallen
was
bridge.
Just really good, and then coming into the outskirts of Kansas City with just all the transport containers and the storage areas all just left there. You know, it was really visual, and again, just adding another layer as to where this world is in such a great way.
Absolutely. I thought there was a nice little touch there when Joe was filling up the car and explaining it to Ellie. He's saying they used to use this to fill up their tanks and helicopters, and Ellie's response is, oh man, I want to see a tank. And that's what we see at the side of the road when they're driving along, loads and loads of tanks. He said this was something that they used to do when they thought the world had an enemy that they could fight, and now it can't. Now it's running out of resources. Now there's different enemies that Fedra have to fight. So I thought that was quite interesting, a nice little touch of something that you could see out through the window. But that moment when they arrive at the I guess it's a kind of like a bypass, the highway bypassing Kansas City, and then have to go into the city. I have to say how frustrating that must be when you get there and he sees all the cars piled up and one truck blocking off the roadway, and then gets out of his car and looks behind the truck, and there is literally nothing behind the truck. There's nothing all the way. He could literally, if he could have moved that truck out of the way, easy journey, right? He would be straight back on the highway again. But because of the way the road structure works and because all these cars were piled up, there's no way for him to get past. He has to go through the city to get back out to the next exit, effectively.
But as well, that moment where he looks through and sees that actually the underpass, leading with the continuation of the road that they're on, bypassing Kansas City, is empty. Watching that the second time, I immediately thought, is that where... And certainly when they get lost coming off, because that they're actually being channeled, that because there's just that one lorry across the entrance that blocked the route. People have to find another way around, and then you get caught into the same kind of ambush that Joel recognized from when he used to do it.
Very good. Yes, could be.
He maybe even understood the early signs that this was, channeling them, and certainly because he explained that it seemed quite easy how he was going to come back onto that road, and then all of a sudden they're kind of in downtown Kansas, and so there's probably been other routes blocked, and effectively they've gotten themselves lost as a result of that, and turned around. So I wonder if that was the other warning sign for Joel as well.
I like that. A very recognizable scene for anybody that played the games as well. This is the ambush is a massive moment. As you can probably see how it plays out in the show, that is a very exciting scene to play in the game. Die quite a few times if you're not careful. But I liked how this is visualized here. I think more than any of the previous episodes, so much of the dialogue and so many of the moments in this episode are taken from the game directly. The moments in the car with Ellie, they're all the dialogue there is specifically from the game. And this moment in the ambush where Joel tells Ellie to put on the seatbelt because that person that is telling them he needs help is not a person that needs help. He's about to ambush them because he did it before. This is something that he used to do in the early days of the apocalypse, or much earlier on, because he was as desperate as these people are. He can see those signs, all those moments from the game. And then we have a standoff as Joel gets pushed off the road really into the dry cleaners, and sends Ellie off into a room, getting her out of the way while he takes out his rifle and takes on two of the people following him, the hunters here.
Yeah, and I think the big point here of this first contact with these people in Kansas City is twofold, really. One is that Joel is saved by Ellie with her using the gun she's gotten from Frank's top drawer to wound the guy strangling Joel. And you have this moment where Joel effectively tells her to get back into her hide hole, and he's taken Frank's gun off her. And in classic trope, I thought you were just going to hear the bang of the revolver as he shoots him, because this guy on the floor, I think he calls himself Brian.
That's right.
I kind of really thought it felt really realistic, because Ellie is pointing the gun, but she's still wavering, and she's shot him seemingly in the spine somewhere, so he can't feel his legs. And just then Brian's response of, I can't feel my legs, we can try and sort this out, we're friends now, it was a misunderstanding. And whether any of that is true or not, I can imagine in that panic that you would say that, you want to try and sort of suddenly pretend it never happened, in a sense, because you're the one on the back foot, and with the low ground. So,
or do anything to get yourself out of the situation.
Exactly. I really thought it was so well acted. But then the fact that Joel, all you hear is the knife, and you go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense, because it doesn't. It's not the bang bang of a gun. Again, locating whether it's clickers or the other bandits to that whole area. Exactly. So I thought it was really good. I think the other aspect that this really brings to the fore then is with the killing of these 3 members of this group.
Mm-hmm.
You have their leader, Kathleen, not entirely sure. She doesn't as such have the evidence that these outsiders, well equipped with food, not Fedra, are working with Henry, but she immediately connects them to Henry in that Henry brought them in. So Joel and Ellie are immediately on the back foot because she sets up a manhunt to look for these 2 outsiders, as well as to continue looking for Henry and Sam.
Yeah.
But none of that is connected at all, except because of how it played out and her absolute obsession with the situation that she's found herself in, which is ultimately the leader of a group that took out the QZ, or at least Fedra,
seems like it,
in Kansas.
Yeah.
Because we hear Ellie mention that, but it's also because her brother was interrogated, tortured, beaten, and ultimately killed, I'm assuming, by Fedra because he was snitched on by collaborators for whatever he was doing.
Yeah.
So maybe they were part of the underground supply route, like Joel and Tess were to some extent.
Yeah.
You know? And
I feel like that's kind of standard operating procedure for Fedra. Wherever they are, they have people that are snitching on their on the other people that live in the QZ. That's how they assert their control. But the fact that her brother died in their custody has pushed Kathleen over the edge, making this woman that doesn't seem very likely to be the leader of this kind of group.
Exactly.
Pushing her into this leadership role. You know, the fact that she does jump to that conclusion that Henry's connected with Joel and Ellie and rallies everybody around her. It feels like she is running on real aggression, real anger for what happened to her brother, and anything that she needs to do to bring everybody along with her to get back at the people that caused her brother's death. That seems to be where Kathleen is. Now, we don't know much about her. She's only in this episode here, obviously, for a very short time. We'll probably see more next week. I know the episode next week is directed and written by the same people. So I think it's kind of a 2-parter, which is why you have this only 45 minutes in this episode. So I think the 2 episodes go together as the story of what's happening here in Kansas City. So I'm sure we'll learn more about Kathleen next week. But right now, I really like this introduction to the character. She seems to be, as I say, almost running on tenterhooks at all times.
Definitely. Vengeance, anger.
She's introduced to us pointing a gun at at her family GP, the person who delivered her when she was a baby, and killed him for his part in any kind of involvement at all in giving information to Fedra. It wasn't even that he was the one that did it. It wasn't even the one that he was covering up for Henry as such. But the fact that he's not giving her any information to lead her to get Henry is why he dies here, which really feels like someone that's at the edge.
Absolutely. Yeah. But even the touch of when they bring back the 3 bodies, one of them is still conscious, and the medic, there's one of her medics there and says, well, can he use a doctor? You know, would a doctor help? And the medic's like, no, he's gone. You know, the wound's too much, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that effectively means, right, he's now dispensable.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's like the pretext for her just following through on the earlier gun to the forehead, where, I mean, I love the line which says, are the necessary conditions now set out whereby you'll talk? Because she has the conversation where, you know, he talked not about her brother because he had a gun to his head from a Fedra soldier. Yeah. And it was just a really good kind of way of dealing with just the impossibility of that situation. What would anyone do with a gun to their head? But the pretext for keeping him alive is gone. He can't give her any information, or he won't. I think it's more that he can't. I think he doesn't know.
Maybe.
And
I feel like because Henry and Sam were in hiding in a specific location that they were able to find, I feel like the doctor may have known that location, that was a little safe house that they had or something. But he doesn't give up the information. Doctors do not survive well in the apocalypse. It seems like they're destined to die, unfortunately. And they do tend to be people that will be very useful when things are going to shit, right?
I would have thought so. I thought they would have had the necessary skills to be... I mean, it's like when there's an emergency on a plane at, 30-odd thousand feet. Then it's a skill that can come in useful, and you would think that would be the case in various apocalypses.
You'd assume so. Yeah. But Kathleen is a really interesting character, though, isn't she?
Oh, definitely. I really want to learn more about her because, again, it's not fully elaborated within the first game. This whole situation, you're just making your way through.
Yeah, Kathleen's not in the game at all. There's no named characters here,
but there are these groups and patrolling the roads with armored vehicles, like we see in the episode, was really good. And it was also really nice to see Melanie Lynskey, who plays Kathleen, here.
Yeah,
because certainly I would know her, you would know her from the TV series The Yellow Jackets.
Yes, absolutely.
So really good to see her in this, and I just want to find out more about what's driving her and how that plays out with respect to Joel and Ellie, Henry and Sam, as well as the potential for other situations to occur that are kind of, just flagged here in this episode as well, such as the crater in the basement of the building where they find Henry's abandoned sort of hideout, which is kind of interesting. I mean, we don't get too much, but it does feel that this kind of crater, which begins to kind of swell and move, that it is something to do with the infective, given that she's saying seal off the building, and keep it quiet, almost as not to spread panic. So I'm like, what is this new feature of the fungal outbreak? Is it some kind of like massive spore geyser that's gonna shoot spores into the atmosphere? Maybe. Is it just a because the underground filaments that we saw in episode 2, is it some
mycelial network, was that?
the mycelial network? Is it something to do with that? So kind of intrigued. I think we do. But
we're not going to spoil it here because that's up to the show to reveal their enemies and villains, let's say, as the show goes on. But I'm really hopeful that this is what I think it is.
Yeah. So that was a nice, exciting bit of sort of foreshadowing and intrigue. So we'll see how that plays out.
Speaking of which, it is really interesting we didn't get any infected in this episode. We got them mentioned on the road by Joel and Ellie, but we didn't see any infected in the episode. So I really like the way they did that because it shows how dangerous humans are on their own in this world after this outbreak has happened. Humans can be just as dangerous an enemy as these creatures that are created from
absolutely.
From the
I mean, but it's even just the idea of, it's almost like medieval fiefdoms, is that, this larger sort of all-encompassing collective society and politics has gone, whilst Fedra is still there. And sometimes that's an unusual thing to see in an apocalyptic show, is the remaining presence of the overarching government of the country that was there beforehand. And Fedra is still there, but in places it's broken down because of how Fedra acted in those, the people in opposition to them, such as the Fireflies or Kathleen and her group. And so you get that splitting up into smaller fiefdoms, and then it becomes about not protecting the whole of the United States, but Kansas City, and only Kansas City that matters. That's what's important to them. And 25 years ago, an outsider would be a tourist coming on holiday to Kansas City or to watch the Kansas City Chiefs. Now it's potentially someone that needs to be shot or ambushed or detained in order to find out whether there's any ill intention towards their own little society. Yeah. So it just like massively complicates it even further.
Yeah.
So I really like that kind of societal structure element that this brings, as much as about just reminding everyone about the danger of other people and their motives.
Yes.
You know, it's because everything's operating on the protection of smaller areas.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting ideas coming in to the show here. Anything else about Kathleen or about Kansas City that we want to talk about here, John?
I think the only other thing from my side is Kathleen's right-hand man, Perry, who is played by Jeffrey Pierce, who did the motion capture and voice of Tommy in the game.
That's right.
So that's a really nice thing. We know Marlene, played by Merle Dandridge, is the same person that voiced her in the Last of Us game. And so it's really good to see another member of that team playing someone in this world.
Absolutely.
On TV. You know?
Yeah, and Troy Baker, who voices Joel in the game, is doing the official podcast as well, so you'll hear his voice.
Yeah, really good.
His dulcet tones every week on the official podcast as well. So that's really nice as well to have this character in there. I presume we'll see more of Perry next week. He's a man of few words, which feels weird for a voice actor like the actor who played Tommy. I believe he even won an award for his voice work on in those games. So it'll be nice to see a bit more of him next week, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like the other side of this time in Kansas City is just with Joel and Ellie as well. And again, it's kind of part of getting to know them and the development of their characters. But I really enjoyed, there was a good age thing that went on here. And I'll explain what I mean by that, in the sense that as they're going to try and find a safe place to sleep, and just to tie them over that night before they can actually kind of scout the area to see how to get out of Kansas City. And they're both going up the stairs. Again, representation. I love another good knee joke about how many stairs that a 56-year-old can go up before going out of breath, and effectively a 16-year-old,
14-year-old,
or 14-year-old, I should say, going up the stairs. So I like that little bit of banter. You know, they got 33 out of 45 levels up. You know, that's pretty good going.
Absolutely.
But stop lying down and panting. But there's that moment just as they start on the journey where Ellie's asking him about how he recognized the ambush, and we find out because he had done similar tactics. And he doesn't answer her when, you know, have you killed innocent people?
Yeah.
And he doesn't answer her. And I like the fact that later, as they've gotten to the room where they're staying for that night, Joel asks about the earlier conversation where Ellie has made it clear that she's shot someone before.
Yeah.
And he asks about that, and she just doesn't want to talk about her first time shooting someone. She almost reciprocates that sort of cold shoulder or silence. And I thought that was a really, really good point to make. Why should she answer him because she's a kid? And it comes back to the other thing of asking Joel, well, does it get any easier as you get older? And he, you know, the reason why he wouldn't let her have a gun, that kids shouldn't do that. I agree. They shouldn't do that if you're in a peaceful society. Absolutely. This is, you know, different rules apply or have evolved over the 20 years. So, you know, trying to just empathize with that, put yourself in that situation. The fact is that he's saying, I do want to protect you. Kids shouldn't have to do that. But the game has changed and they need to survive. I mean, Fedra are teaching them how to use guns. I like the fact that ultimately his response to it is, no, it doesn't get easier. I wouldn't want to be doing this as much as I don't want you to do this.
Exactly.
I'm just trying to put it off.
At your age.
It's not right for you to do it at, your age. I'm trying to put it off for as long as possible where you may have to do that. And it's to the point where he also is connected with pre-outbreak.
Yeah.
He remembers flying. He remembers like the little touch of telling her to put the seatbelt on at the end of the last episode 3.
Yeah.
And Ellie being so inquisitive because she is an outbreak, a child of the outbreak. She hasn't experienced things the way they were.
Exactly.
Her view is a very dangerous world where it's survival, where if you potentially don't shoot someone, you could be the person dying.
Yeah.
So I just like that whole exchange because I thought it was fascinating. Just try and show that you're not in the same world physically, but morally, or value in a value way, but also from the different age perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
All these different conversations.
Yeah.
And just thought it was really well done. And I thought it was quite sophisticated what they got across. Whether, I'm not saying I disagree with Joel, I'm just saying I liked the counterpoints that Ellie brought. I liked her inquisitiveness where when she asks the question, say, well, does it get easier? Well, it doesn't, even if you're an adult. So why should an adult be doing? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was just really good, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does speak to a sense of idealism for Joel.
Yeah.
He feels that young people should be protected. He feels kids should be protected, partially because that's what happened to his own daughter. She died because, in his mind, he didn't protect her. So he doesn't feel like Ellie, who is the same age as his daughter, should be even anywhere near being in situations where she has to kill to survive. I know the world's changed and he knows the world's changed, but he doesn't feel it should. The idealism in his mind is this should never happen to children. Children shouldn't be involved in situations where they have to save their own lives with guns because other people should be around helping them, like Fedra should be helping kids. The people that work with him, like Tess, should be helping kids and taking care of them. But it does contradict his point earlier on that she is cargo to him. But now he's getting closer to her, so he does feel like that. It is a great moment in the episode. Yeah, really like that.
It's just how she sort of pulls at the inconsistencies in what he's saying in this new reality.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is also the argument that, well, if more people did that, it wouldn't be as bad as it is. So, I mean, it is a real minefield about how you look at this, but it's just so good that they tackle this and have those pieces of dialogue that allow you just to consider, weigh up, think, and see that being a thing in this world and the differences. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah. Great stuff. Any other notes and points about the episode that you want to talk about at all, John?
Just one, which is, of course, the fantastic last pun that we got as just before they go to sleep. It is the one last pun. You've got to restate it on the podcast here. Did you know that diarrhea is hereditary?
No.
It runs in your genes.
Terrible.
Quality punnery.
It did make me laugh, I must admit. Even though I have definitely heard that pun before, it did make me laugh.
I haven't. Yeah. I liked.
You liked
it. It was puntastic, dare I say it.
Yeah, good stuff. A couple of quick notes from me. The pun book itself, no pun intended, part 2 from Will Livingston is in the game. That is something that Ellie carries around in her backpack with her. Pretty regularly quoting those kinds of puns throughout the game, so nice to see it showing up on the show. One other thing from a fan of Apocalypse's, one thing I really liked that they did in this episode particularly, and this might kind of put me into my own kind of wrap up of why I like this episode so much. One of the things they did so well here was giving some kind of backstory to other people in the Apocalypse. It's something that happens within long running shows. I think Walking Dead would be a really good example of this, or other apocalyptic shows that go into long periods of time. Everybody else that's alive around you after the apocalypse happened has had a very difficult life to go through. They've all had their experiences, their adventures, their loves and losses But so often in other shows and movies, they're treated like cannon fodder for the main characters, that they're not as important as the main characters. So getting to focus a little bit of time here in this episode on some other people in the apocalypse. We saw that majorly with Bill and Frank and their experience that they went through last episode, but we're even seeing it with some of the side characters here. Just even that moment with Brian where he's crying, doing everything he can to survive, because he's done that for 20 years. He's lived for 20 years in the post-apocalyptic world. He's done whatever he can to stay alive during that period. And of course he's going to beg for his life and use anything at his disposal, whether it is to plead with a little girl not to shoot him because his mom's just around the corner, whether they can trade with each other. He's going to plead like that. But it adds so much more to the world that they're creating here in The Last of Us than it would in other shows and movies where 20 or 30 characters could die in an episode and you don't know anything about them, you know, or in a movie.
Definitely.
So I really like that they've taken that step to add this stuff to the characters that we saw within The Last of Us, the game, because we focused so much time on Joel and Ellie and their interaction with the environment around them, as opposed to what was going on with everybody else. It's something that they actually developed for the second game with The Last of Us Part 2. You do hear relationship conversations between people that are technically your enemies in that game. You hear them calling out to each other. You hear, is your brother okay? You'll hear those kind of call outs to kind of develop that world a bit, but they're obviously doing a lot more here, which you can do with a TV show. So I think that's a really good element that was added to the series with this episode. I did really like episode 4 overall. How about yourself, John? Did you enjoy the 4th episode of The Last of Us?
Yeah, I absolutely did. I'd give this 5 praiseworthy poo puns out of 5.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, this was all about Ellie and Joel on the road in a tight situation. Effectively, the just natural fluctuations, evolution of two people who are forced together.
Yeah.
Only in episode 1 in that sense. So however long that is, having to sort of fit in with each's personal space. And I really, really enjoyed this. I thought a really clever dialogue between them. I really enjoyed, in particular, this coyness from both of them about not answering the questions put to them, which were about killing other people, and innocent people. So not that we know that with Ellie, but certainly with Joel and this other person, you know, Ellie is staying pretty tight-lipped about that. So, you know, I liked how that, in a sense, I have the right not to tell you just because you're an adult. And again, it's to the point then with the direction from Joel, not to carry a gun. He relents to that. And ultimately she asks him the question, well, does it get easier as you get older? And he says no. And you can add on to that with potentially the familiarity of having done that consistently for 20 years, depending on how many times he's killed in that situation. So, you know, it just draws really different questions. The picture it paints of Joel, you know, what's happening with Ellie. So I loved all this conversation. I loved the banter as well, with the puns, with the gay porn rag. I loved
See you later, dude.
all of that. I really liked just seeing the landscape as you drive through here on the way to Kansas City, and now seeing Kathleen, and just these first few moments with Kathleen and her non-Federate people, and what they've done, seemingly totally driven by the death of her brother and how he died, and what was done to him. And you see the power in that. So I can't wait to see more of that. And certainly with her right-hand man, Perry, how Ellie and Joel get embroiled into the politics of this new fiefdom of Kansas City, centered around Kathleen and Henry. So it'd be really, really good, as well as that swirl pulsating crater happening as well in the basement.
Can't wait to see what's in that.
What type of Jack-in-the-Box will that be, I wonder?
Excellent. I think it's time to go on over to the pub quiz. Let's go to the World's End pub quiz, John. Do you want to give us the question for The Last of Us Episode 4?
Yes, fellow quizzers, fellow survivors, welcome back to the pub. I think we need a good amount of booze after this episode. Certainly with all the puns, whether it's just to recover from the cheesiness of them, or, I guess, realizing that the world has truly gone down the Swanee. But yes, question for episode 4. Please hold to my hand. What 2 movies from 2003 are listed at the Globe Cinema in Kansas City?
Excellent. Need some eagle eyes there in Kansas City to pick those out. But John, do you want to get the question one more time?
Certainly. What 2 movies from 2003 are listed at the Globe Cinema in Kansas City?
Excellent. That's question 4. If you've missed any of the questions, pop on over to our website at tvpodcastindustries.com. All the questions that we put out are listed up there, or you can re-listen to all the podcasts, of course, and put them all together at the end of the series with all 9 answers. Email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, and you could be in with a chance of getting your hands on a copy of The Last of Us Part 1 on either PlayStation 5 or PC. If you don't have a PC or a PlayStation 5, we will think of an alternative for you, but that's our main prize for our World's End pub quiz this season anyway. Hopefully you're excited about that.
Absolutely. Good luck, fellow quizzers and survivors.
And also, if you want to be in with an extra chance to enter that competition for that prize, all you need to do is rate us on Apple Podcasts. Send us a quick snippet of your rating, and we'll put you into the draw with an extra entry.
Yeah, good stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks to everybody that's been sending their entries in so far. And thanks again to those of you that support us over on Patreon. This episode is brought to you by our Patreons, including Cheryl Jones. Cheryl, thank you so much for your kind thoughts about our podcast about The Last of Us Episode 3 as well. And thanks so much for your support on Patreon.
Yes, thank you so much, Cheryl, for your support. Really good and really nice to hear your thoughts on our episode 3 podcast. Really good stuff. If, like Cheryl, you wish to support us for a monthly amount, you can head on over to patreon.com/TV podcast Industries. Or if you want to support us for a one-off donation, you can head on over to buymeacoffee.com/TVPI. Of course, you can support us by sharing and subscribing to the podcast as well, because sharing the podcast is, of course, sharing the love, which is absolutely needed in this apocalyptic world. We also love your support through all the feedback that we get from our fellow survivors, which you can send through our email to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com or through our group over on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries.
Absolutely, yes. First up, an email in from Suzanne Nelson on episode 3, who says, "Hello, gentlemen. I'm sure I'm not the first to say this in your feedback, but it can't be helped. This was definitely the best hour plus of TV I've seen in a long, long time by far. Watching it, I was already looking forward to hearing Derek and John's take on this episode, since it involves middle-aged men in a long-term committed relationship, something we don't see represented hardly at all. I'm hoping the two of you were pleased with it and how the show chose to deviate from the game. I can go on and on, which I won't, on how I love the decision to change Bill's character and to essentially add Frank, rather than just reading his nasty note and seeing his dead body hanging there. Just a note in your podcast about the episode, Lincoln, Massachusetts is the name of the town Bill lives in and is about 20 miles by car from Boston. It's a real place." Interesting. Yeah, I know in the game and in the show, it's kind of called Bill's Town. So it's referred to as that. So that's why I definitely didn't know that it was Lincoln, Massachusetts. So good call there. Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah, great stuff, Suzanne. Thanks for that. Yes, and hopefully if you're listening to our episode 4, you hear some of my thoughts around episode 3. Absolutely loved the episode as well. And it was just great to see that kind of episode in this kind of show, in a really meaningful way as well. So yeah, absolutely agree with your thoughts. It was such a good piece of TV, and one of the best in a very long time as well.
Without a doubt. As for how it deviated from the game, I must say the show itself is doing such a great job of telling a great story in this world that I'm more happy when I see some things that are taken from the game than I'm noticing things that are deviating from the game. I really don't want it to stick to the template of the game. It can't, because the game, you're running around shooting people as the main character.
Yeah.
It's a third person shooter game, which you couldn't put on TV. It would be really boring. Watch the last 20 minutes of Doom, the movie, and you'll see how bad that can be. But that's not this show. This show is taking advantage of a really great story to tell a story in the wider world. And, as I say, I'm not seeing deviations rather than seeing homages and seeing references and seeing dialogue plucked from the game and put in this really great TV show. So, so I'm never concerned if they change something to make it better, which they absolutely did with episode 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Suzanne, for your thoughts there. Moving on to another one of our favourite Dooms. It is Victor Von Doom on episode 4 of The Last of Us. Victor says, I like the episode. Nice to see Ellie make Joel laugh. Kathleen is rather scary. What version of fungus is under the rubble? Well, indeed. Is it a massive mutated athlete's foot, or what is it going to be?
I can't believe you didn't go for the triple M there, John, with the massive mutated mushroom there.
Oh, massive mutated mushroom, indeed, yes. Maybe it's akin to one of the mushrooms in Mario Kart.
It could be. Thanks, Victor. Donald Dennis says, this episode was still very good, but it was not as impressive as the other 3 we've seen so far. Maybe it's because this was the first one that felt like it was setting up the next bit instead of being about itself. But that isn't all bad. It really does feel like they're setting up for something big to come up out of the basement. Seems like they went awfully far south from Boston to get to their destination. Interesting. I must admit, I don't really know the geography of America that would put you going from Boston to Kansas City and then going on to Wyoming. I know in the game itself, it's Pittsburgh, and there's references to the roads near Pittsburgh that they're going to. But I must admit, I don't know how far south they've gone here.
They've certainly gone further south. Not that I'm an expert on American geography, but it might just be to do with the interstates, that they can or can't move along them. Yeah. I mean, even the sense that it takes longer to get from A to B because you're going to have to fill up more often with siphoned off gas. But also, if you come to a dead end like they did at Kansas City, you've got to go around. And then all of a sudden, how many times do you have to go around, which means you try a different route. So, I mean, we're not seeing any of that.
Yeah.
Might not be the case, possibly just for filming locations, but it could be something to do with that, I think.
Yeah. Actually, do you know where it was filmed? Part of this episode was filmed in Edmonton in Canada, where myself and John have been in the past. So apparently another one of the reasons why it's not Pittsburgh is because they couldn't make the 2 cities that they were using in the background. They couldn't make it look as much like Pittsburgh as they could make it look like Kansas City. But I did like the little joke in Ellie's map reading of American directions when you're traveling really, really far distances. How do you get there? Well, you travel on the Route 79, really far, and then you travel on the other one forever. Our trip is 25 hours, and we've got 2 roads to travel, basically. So, a nice little...
that's it. And even with the names as well, I thought that was kind of interesting, because sometimes I struggle with how you pronounce the particular city or town names. Certainly not so much Pittsburgh or the big cities like Kansas City and so on. But I think it's Cheyenne that she mentions, and then of course there was Laramie. So all I thought of was The Simpsons with Laramie cigarettes.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly.
The Simpsons get everywhere.
They certainly do. I think as well, though. I agree with you, Donald, to some extent, that there's certainly a big setup around the basement, the pulsating crater, absolutely. But I still felt as though this episode was about being itself. It was ultimately a road trip. It was itself was Ellie and Joel.
Yeah.
And time with them. And maybe, given it was 45 minutes, Derek, you mentioned about, well, it could be a two-parter. I mean, it's not billed as that.
Yeah.
So I really took this as, road trip, the experiences, the setbacks, what life throws at you, and how that's building into Ellie and Joel's understanding of one another and the characterization of these two characters for the audience. And I felt that was about being itself, because moving from Boston to Wyoming would mean a lot of time spent chatting in the vehicle, and obstacles, whether they're people, the infected, or physical obstacles as well.
Exactly.
So I still think it was very much about itself, for sure.
Yeah, but it's not a standalone episode. You're not going to jump into it and just watch this one episode. I don't think you'd even do that with episode 3, because you'd have to cut off all of the Joel and Ellie scenes at either end of episode 3. Episode 3 did feel like a short film in the middle of the Joel and Ellie story that's going on, but here this felt much more, as you say, John, about Joel and Ellie getting to know each other, and now we have the introduction to characters that'll be in the next episode, definitely.
Yeah, so, and whatever's in the basement.
Yeah, and looking forward to that next episode coming out on Friday this week, early because of Super Bowl. Thanks so much to everybody for your feedback for this episode. Hopefully we'll hear more from you next week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Donald. Thanks, Victor. And thanks, Suzanne.
Mm-hmm. If you want to send us any feedback in, you can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com with any thoughts that you have. You can also pop on over to our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. We'd love to hear from you. We have lots and lots more stuff coming up on TV Podcast Industries. Tomorrow we have our episode about Star Wars The Bad Batch. Episode 7 and episode 8. And it's a two-parter being released tomorrow on Disney+. So you'll get that in your feed as soon as those episodes have finished airing. Some good ones there, actually. Really good episodes. We're also going to be back, of course, with The Last of Us episode 5, Endure and Survive. We'll be recording.
Survive what?
I know. We'll be recording a little bit earlier, of course, because of the Super Bowl, because the episode's being released early. So you'll get that in your feed as soon as we can get it there for you. Next week, another big one. We're starting another new series, Star Trek Picard Season 3, the third and final season, as the rest of the cast of The Next Generation join Jean-Luc Picard on an adventure in space.
Yeah, let's boldly cross our fingers where no crossed fingers have gone before.
Absolutely. Yes. Embargo on those episodes. Not going to talk about our thoughts just yet as to what there is in season 3, but we are really, really looking forward to the third and final season of Star Trek Picard. And we will be going back to the cinema. Not exactly sure of the date. We will be able to fit that in. But Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, the first of Phase 5 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The first Marvel that we've done since last year's Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special. So that'll be fun to see when we're going to fit that in. And it'll be fun to see in the cinema.
I'm really looking forward to this Ant-Man movie to see what little hints or possible theories can get around Phase 5. I think I already have some of it from some of the Doctor Strange stuff, even though that was in Phase 4, but essentially setting up aspects for Phase 5. But we'll see.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Cannot wait.
The movie comes out in the cinema on the 17th, I think, of February, if I've got my days right there. That's Friday week. Yeah. 17th of February. So looking forward to seeing that whenever we get the chance to get to the cinema and watch that.
Excellent stuff. Yes, thank you so much, fellow survivors, for joining us. Remember, we will be back, as Derek has mentioned, with The Last of Us Episode 5, Endure and Survive. But in the meantime, keep watching, keep listening, and keep...
Bye.
Bye.